Hello and welcome back to Eurospy Cinema, a series where I review various movies that fit into the Eurospy category. Today I'm going to be reviewing another film from 1966, The Wacky World of James Tont, also known as James Tont Operation 2. The film was an Italian-French co-production and starred Lando Buzzanca as James Tont's super spy. As you can probably tell from it featuring James Tont, yes, this is indeed a comedy Eurospy, so prepare yourself for plenty of laughs. Ha ha. Just to preface this, I don't speak Italian, and so I watched this film with subtitles. However, the subtitles do seem slightly dodgy, as whenever a character says me, it's spelt N1E, which makes me question the authenticity of the entire subtitling operation. So please take this review with a grain of salt, as I may or may not know the actual plot of the film. The film opens on shots of the British Embassy in Russia? I mean, I'm not entirely sure of what country this is meant to be, but considering everyone calls each other comrade, I would assume this is meant to be some part of the Soviet Union. We then see that the embassy has been broken into and the villains open a safe, only to discover that our hero, James Tont, was hiding inside. He surprises them and we enter the title sequence. Interestingly, the song is in English, and it's actually pretty good. Also, the bass line of it completely rips off the Bond theme. James arrives at the International Secret Agent Convention by means of a taxi, and is given a large ribbon which is emblazoned with Secret Agent. We see that many spies have turned up to this convention, and James Bond even sends a letter saying that he was too busy with Operation Thunderball to be able to attend. The chairman of this glorious event is extremely suspicious and wears a black monocle, which is painted so that he sees everything through a keyhole shape. We even meet the sister of Mata Hari here, who it seems is in financial troubles, as Mata Hari wasn't given severance pay when she left the Secret Service. This causes an uproar, as many secret agents are not being paid well. James Tont is then singled out and ridiculed, as Colonel Gerard says that Tont's methods are verging on sci-fi rather than anything a spy would carry out. He says that all of the older school of spying will end up in a museum, and that these 00 monsters must be stopped. Tont is then asked to give a speech. In the speech, he proceeds to explain the great benefits that gadgets have to spies by demonstrating a gadget concealed in his finger that will tell him whether something is poisoned. By using this gadget, he accidentally uncovers a plot by the Russian agents to poison him. He then foils another attempt, a poisoned spider with a dart gun hidden in his ribbon. James Tont rebuts Colonel Gerard's arguments using facts and logic, explaining that 00 agents have completed 1,224 missions with less than 1% failure, so their methods work. He then gets a standing ovation, and the chairman designates him as Secretary General for this special spy association. James Tont then sits down in his new special chair, only for it to start massaging him. You know those vibrating chairs that are sold, the ones that supposedly massage you? Well, I don't really like them. And it seems that James Tont agrees with me, as this is exactly my expression when a well-meaning relative lures me into one of those contraptions and switches it on. Fortunately, Tont has a giant circuit breaker hidden under his jacket which he proceeds to flip, and the chair stops. This causes one of the Russian agents to say that he will now quit his job. Following this, James Tont says goodbye to everyone, telling them that they should all follow his example in future so as to escape death, only for him to be tripped up by a little girl sitting on the steps. There is suddenly a major plot twist. It turns out that the girl was an agent from Mata Hari's sister and stole some microfilm out of Tont's pocket. And the microfilm is never mentioned in the film again. It turns out that Tont has broken his leg, so an ambulance arrives and collects him and takes him to a health farm. We then see another sinister looking character who also has a black monocle, enjoying himself talking to a nurse called Clarissa. He says to her that he can offer to her all the riches of the world, and that he has factories that apparently provide at least half of the world's food. She doesn't seem too interested though. This doesn't deter him from offering her to join him for dinner. We then cut to him lighting some sticks of sandalwood in preparation of the evening ahead. He has also bought some champagne and proceeds to wet his hair down with an oversized spray bottle. However, the nurse sent to his room doesn't turn out to be the one that he loves. He discovers that Clarissa is actually busy with Tont in room 24. Tont, meanwhile, is fraternizing with the nurse who is attending to his broken leg. Unfortunately, Mr. Sinister sees this scene, and it doesn't make him very happy. Clarissa then takes Tont to a sort of, workout room? I don't really know what this is meant to be. And also, hurrah! Tont's leg is miraculously healed. He's then strapped onto a bike that automatically pedals for him, and he's left for half an hour on the low setting. Unfortunately for Tont, Sinister Man shows up and turns up the speed to turbo, causing Tont to make some rather amusing faces. This whole scene is completely lifted from the Bond film Thunderball. Except in Thunderball, Bond was on a back stretching machine, whereas Tont is on a bike. I mean, to be honest, this actually looks better in my opinion. The bike makes a lot more sense than whatever this is meant to be. We then see that Monocle Man is enjoying himself playing some croquet. But Tont has messed with the ball, making it explode when it is struck. Tont is very pleased with himself about this gag, but Croquet Guy doesn't seem to agree. Following this, Tont is getting covered in mud for some reason. He's then told to rest for 10 minutes like this, and of course Tont's face is covered so that it's easy for the Great Monocle to sneak in and stab him. Oh no, what has happened to our hero? But wait, he was actually hiding under the table. How did he get there? Who knows? Okay, I'm gonna say it here before I continue with this review. This movie makes no sense. All of the scenes seem to be selected for one of two reasons. First, whether they're funny, and second, if they reference Bond. Otherwise, there is literally zero thought put into any kind of plot. We also find out here that the masked monocle's name is Mr. Spring. The next morning, Tont disguises himself as Mr. Spring's nurse, then with the aid of a giant needle, stabs him in the bum. We then see that he's aged a lot suddenly. Clarissa arrives to give him his actual injection, and he doesn't even recognise her. He also, it appears, believes now that the First World War involved Switzerland declaring war on Ireland. Now that Mr. Spring is so old, Clarissa falls for Tont, who then tells her that his kissing abilities have been cited in multiple encyclopedias. Clarissa then gives Tont a radioactive bath? Yeah, that sounds perfectly safe. But then, we see a sinister hand moving over to the dial for the bath's temperature. The hand dials the warm part of the bath temperature down to 0 degrees, and it goes and ups the cold dial to 60 degrees. Clarissa then returns to Tont, only to find him frozen in the bath and wearing one of his priceless expressions. I have to point out a few things though. Firstly, the water of the bath would have descended in temperature, not just suddenly frozen over. So surely Tont would have noticed that the bath that he was told was 30 degrees in temperature was actually getting very, very cold. The other question is, why is Tont's head under the ice? Last we saw, he had his head above the water, and as the water would have gradually reduced in temperature, he surely wouldn't have just popped his head underwater while it froze over him. Anyway, we see then that all the major newspapers have covered this hot story of James Tont's mysterious death. Also, the filmmakers put no effort into these fake newspapers. You can see where they pasted the headlines onto the old newspapers. Oh, this film. We then see a black truck driving to a building that I think is meant to be MI6's headquarters. This guy, who I'm pretty sure is a knockoff of M, is addressing the press, and after that goes to visit... We're going to have a little quiz here. Where do you think knockoff M is going to go to? A. James Tont's grave to mourn his death. B. A knockoff Q branch with a knockoff Q. C. The health clinic to look for clues. The correct answer is B. A knockoff Q branch with a knockoff Q. Congratulations to all of you who guessed correctly, your prize is self-satisfaction. Knockoff Q, who is called Y, proceeds to place giant heating pads on top of the block of ice that Tont is inside. The ice block then begins to melt, much to Y's satisfaction. Also, this shot scared the life out of me when I first saw it. Why it's in here, I have no idea. Anyway, Y seems almost surprised that his machine worked, but Knockoff M still isn't too happy, as Tont is still rather blue-coloured. Then, while Tont reads the newspaper, he suddenly changes back to his normal colour, with no explanation as to why. We then discover that this was all part of Tont's next mission. The person who froze him over was actually an agent who did it so that they could fake his death. Knockoff M then tells Tont that there is a powerful criminal organisation that is plotting a monstrous plan against a large religious centre. What religious centre it is though, they're not sure. A part of some kind of weapon, the Phasertron, has been stolen. However, they know that to assemble the weapon, another part is needed, and that part is manufactured in Westmoreland. Apparently, the parts of the machine are radioactive, so Y gives Tont a special tiny Geiger counter that is concealed in his mouth. The counter will apparently cause a small reaction in his sinuses if he's near something radioactive. Thank goodness Y didn't give Tont this before his bath earlier. Y also gives Tont some special eye drops that mean if he cries a special sequence of tears, an emergency alarm will be activated. Tont is then sent to infiltrate a group of bandits, who it is believed are going to steal the item for the criminal organisation. He's also given a false name, Bingo Kowalski. No, not that Kowalski. Tont then assumes his cover, which seems to involve walking through a flock of pigeons and slapping people's faces. Good job, mate, you're really fitting in well. He then goes to a club and sings in English, which feels a little weird. After his musical number, he attempts to pick up a girl with the classic line, "I'd like to measure the carpet." However, this wasn't a smart idea on his part, as he misses all the ruffians running off to attack the Westmoreland factory place while he is spending time with her. Also, I like this Beatles mural here. Meanwhile, the girl has taken Tont to her room, where it appears everything is falling to bits. We then cut to MI6, where Y is telling Knockoff M that some ruffians have been attacking stuff in Westmoreland. Knockoff M seems very happy about this and tells Y to tell the police to not get involved, that MI6 will pay all the damages. Their minds are at rest as they think that Tont is in the group of ruffians, so it'll be easy for him to find the head honcho. Meanwhile, Tont is still with the girl in her room, but her boyfriend shows up, so he defeats him with a door. The next morning, Tont returns to the bar he was in earlier and is surprised by Knockoff M giving him a video call through Tont's packet of cigarettes. Knockoff M then proceeds to reprimand him for not going off with the hoodlums who attacked Westmoreland, as now the next part of the Phasertron has been stolen. So he threatens Tont that if he doesn't hurry up and find the ringleader of the organisation, he'll be thrown in jail. Because of course that's what you do to your secret agents who fail on missions. We then see that a girl in a shiny white jacket is calling up a guy called Alpha 1 to tell him that she's got the Phasertron and that she will proceed with the next part of the plan. However, Alpha 1 tells her that the deadline must be brought forward, so she should bring the components to Florida, and mentions how Cape Kennedy is about to do something. She then places the pieces inside a guitar and drives off with Tont, who jumps in her car uninvited. Tont then attempts to play the guitar, but the radioactivity sets off his sinuses, and he's alerted that the parts are inside it. Shiny White Jacket Girl then drives Tont to her hotel, and it is suddenly nighttime. What a quick day that was. He goes off then to buy a sandwich for them, only for the sandwich's onions to make him start crying and set off his emergency SOS beacon. So a bunch of police arrive in a hurry. Tont then gets angry at them, explaining it was only the onions. Then he fakes attacking Knockoff M and pretends to attack all of the police. He also kills this guy accidentally, as he thought his gun was loaded with blanks. Shiny White Jacket then shows up and congratulates Tont. He then pretends that the cops were actually after her, and that now he knows everything about the whole atomic weapon smuggling business. This then convinces her that she'll have to take Tont with her. But then 3 other dangerous looking guys show up to attack the duo, so Tont chews some gum so that they can float away and escape. It appears that they were airborne for a very long time, as when they descend, it's suddenly day again. Also, Tont lost his wig in the air. This is when we get the film's biggest plot twist. It turns out that the villain was Mr. Spring the whole time. We see him explain to his subordinates how he has found a way to shrink down humans and then return them to their normal size, which he is soon to do to a German pilot. Apparently, the plan is to smuggle this German pilot into Cape Kennedy as dehydrated food so that he can replace the pilot of NASA's latest capsule. This is so that they can steal the final part of the super weapon, which is apparently the capsule's payload. Because of course that's what you do when you have a third of a super weapon lying around. Also, they refer to Cape Kennedy's scientists as Her Majesty's scientists, which isn't correct. I hope these guys realize that Cape Kennedy is not in England, because otherwise their plan may not work. Shiny White Jacket arrives and we find out that her actual name is Helen Collins. Because Helen won't tell them where she hid the 2 components, she is drugged. Also, we discover that Mr. Spring's first name is Magnus, so that's nice. Then, we see Magnus and some goons sneak into Tont and Helen's hotel. The goons then discover Tont there, recognize him, and realize that his death must have been faked. However, it is of no consequence to them, as they believe they have drowned him in a sink. After getting the components they wanted, the villains leave. But what's this? Tont isn't really dead? It turns out he was using a micro-respirator to survive. The film plays some really dramatic music over this reveal. But come on guys, did you think anyone in the audience believed that he was really dead? We then see that Helen has been locked in a big cell. But don't worry, Tont is on the case to break her out with the use of a trampoline. How did he know about this place so that he could come and break her out? Who knows? But oh no, Tont's trampoline has been stolen. Tont then puts on a pair of false teeth and proceeds to gnaw through the bars so as to save Helen. What has this film become? And don't worry, there are still about 35 minutes left of the film to cover. Once Tont has finished gnawing through the bars, he proceeds to climb in and join Helen in her cell. He then reveals to her that he is in fact James Tont of MI6, and that he is indeed a 00 agent. What number? Who knows? Helen then explains to Tont Magnus'S plan of infiltrating Cape Kennedy, but they are interrupted when a bunch of guards arrive, and Tont defeats them with a gun equipped in the heel of his shoe. Meanwhile, Magnus'S scientists are preparing to shrink the German pilot down, and somehow Tont and Helen are hidden inside a cupboard in the shrinking room. How did they get there in such a short space of time? The pilot then activates the machine and is flattened into a literal cardboard cutout. Tont then proceeds to fold this poor man up. I genuinely feel really sorry for this guy right now. Not only has he just endured being turned into a pancake, but he is also now being folded up, something which must be excruciatingly painful. Tont then places the pilot into an envelope and tells Helen to mail him to MI6 headquarters. They have a short romantic moment before she has to run off to catch the post. Tont then takes a pill, gets into the machine, and flattens himself with it. The scientists then return and believe that it is the pilot whom they are posting, and not that it is really Tont. We then cut to what I believe is meant to be Cape Kennedy, where an astronaut is having a nice meal before preparing to leave on his spaceflight. He proceeds to pour water on what he believes to be his meal, only for his wife to call him, distracting him long enough for Tont to be inflated by the water. Unfortunately, Tont's right hand is not inflated yet and is still a piece of cardboard, but he soon remedies that by sticking it in the jug of water. Then, he grabs a miniature crossbow from somewhere. Okay, the film isn't even trying now. He just finds a crossbow? Come on! Tont fires it at this poor unsuspecting astronaut, knocking him out. As soon as he does this, the countdown starts, so Tont puts on his spacesuit and leaves with the capsule. Then, we cut to Magnus on his yacht, where he's playing a James Bond board game. The baddies then switch on a TV to watch the capsule launch. You can also tell that this man here is very smart, as he is rubbing his face with his gun. With the aid of stock footage, Tont takes off. However, he then gets a call from the astronaut's wife. As the conversation begins to drag on, he calls her an idiot and hangs up. After a little while, and some okay model work, Tont gets a call from the president. After they exchange some chit-chat, such as Tont inquiring about the president's gallbladder, they say goodbye. The self-destruct light suddenly switches on in the capsule. Oh no, what will Tont do? He beats it with a hammer and all is fine. Tont then gets a call from Magnus, telling him to prepare for re-entry as he is nearly above their yacht. Magnus then radios some men in a little yellow raft to prepare to receive the capsule. Then the capsule is suddenly on the water. Yep, no explanation of what happened in the re-entry or anything. Tont just teleported to the water. The yellow raft men then grab Tont and the super weapon piece out and put him in the raft. Once he's aboard, however, a man with a beard realizes that Tont isn't the German pilot, but Tont easily dispatches him with his flippers and a fire extinguisher. Two more goons then arrive, prompting a short action sequence, but they are too much for Tont, and he is hauled off to see Magnus. Magnus then reveals that his target is Vatican City. With the help of the Phasertron, he will be able to launch St. Peter's treasure into orbit, where it will then descend into the ocean, and Magnus will recover it. Magnus has also set Tont's feet into concrete so that he can be drowned in the sea. Tont then attempts to cry so as to signal knock off M, and, following an excruciating sequence, he cries, much to his relief, and is then ejected out of the bottom of the boat. Y then shows up and proceeds to cut Tont's feet out of the concrete and give him some oxygen. He then takes him back to his turtle-shaped submarine. Unfortunately, the turtle gets caught in a fishing net by some fishermen who believe that they have caught Moby Dick. Tont and Y jump out of the turtle sub, scare the fishermen, and steal their van. Meanwhile, we see that Magnus's plan is underway, as half his men are preparing the gold to be launched, and the other half are preparing to fire the Phasertron. Tont and Y then arrive at Vatican City, both in disguise. After gassing the guards, they sneak in and disguise themselves as guards in the blink of an eye. Following a short and mildly interesting fight, Tont and Y attack the men who are about to activate the Phasertron, and put a stop to it. Tont then disguises himself as one of Magnus's men, and defeats his goons with some guns hidden in his ears. Tont then sneaks up to where Magnus is waiting. Magnus then, discovering his plans have been foiled, pulls a dehydrating pistol on Tont. But using his wits and ingenuity, Tont gets the pistol off Magnus and shoots it at him, reducing him to a simple picture on the wall. We then cut to Tont, walking down the street looking for Helen. He finds her as a member of the Salvation Army, for some reason, and after giving her a big encyclopedic kiss, the movie ends. Well, that was the wacky world of James Tont. What a film. To be honest, I don't really know where to start. The film isn't really your usual Eurospy. I have to agree with Colonel Gerard from the beginning of the film. This is almost verging on sci-fi. Half of the film feels like a knockoff of the recent Bond film of the time, Thunderball, the clinic sequence and the whole bit on Magnus's yacht standing out the most in that. And when I begin to think more about the film, the more I realise how much of it was just of zero consequence. The pre-title sequence has no bearing on anything, just a mildly interesting intro, then the whole spy sequence contributes nothing to the story either. Even the clinic is basically useless as well. Sure, I mean, there are some funny bits in those sequences, but overall it's just silly. I wasn't expecting much from this film, considering it is just meant to be a comedy, but there is a certain level of intelligence that I like to get from a film. This film supplies literally none of it. The vast majority of things that happen are just for the reason of shoehorning in overly blatant Bond references, or for the purpose of supporting awful jokes. I mean, sadly there aren't even any particularly interesting action sequences. All the action is shot with so many close-ups that most of the time I can't even tell what's happening. And any other action will be immediately diffused by a ridiculous gadget. The jokes are a major part of this film, but the problem is that there are just way too many of them. At times, I feel like I'm watching Italian get smart with some of the ridiculous things that Tont does. The film would probably work quite well if there were half of the jokes in there, but because of the overwhelming onslaught of them, the film just becomes unbearably silly. Lando Buzzanca also does not really improve the silliness of the film. He generally just acts like an annoying school kid rather than a suave, sophisticated spy. This can especially be seen in the clinic sequences. And another thing that sort of adds to this is that he spends about a third of the film in disguise. France Anglade does quite a nice job as Helen. She seems to be enjoying herself and she has some nice moments. But I still don't understand why all of a sudden she decided to join the Salvation Army while Tont had left for space. But then again, I stopped questioning this film's logic a while ago. Loris Gizy plays Mr. Spring pretty well. Considering he's meant to be a knockoff of Emilio Largo from Thunderball, he does do a pretty neat job. However, he isn't in the film long enough to really be a menace. Although I can understand the filmmakers wanting to sort of build up his reveal a bit, it really doesn't work. He just comes across as a bad man with a monocle rather than any kind of interesting or serious threat. Also, his character looks pretty similar to the guy from the spy convention at the beginning of the film, which really confused me for a while, as I thought maybe he was like a double agent or something, but no. Jacques Dufilot does quite a nice job as Y. At first he's sort of like presented as a kind of Q type character, but by the end of the film he's basically just another 00 operative helping out Todd, which I have to say is a pretty unique idea. The film has a pretty good score by Bruno Canfora. He generally mimics the classic John Barry Bond sound, but that does work pretty well. The title song is not spectacular, but I do think it's suitable for the film. Also, I appreciate how scenes that are really silly or ridiculous are scored in a silly or ridiculous way. It definitely makes the film more bearable to know that I'm not alone in thinking how ridiculous some parts of this film really are. To round it off, the wacky world of James Tont is definitely not your normal Eurospy adventure. The only way to get some enjoyment from it is to just switch off your brain and laugh at the jokes. Unfortunately, it really is just a cash-in on the success of Bond at the time. There is very little substance in the script at all. Most of the action has been shot in such a way that anything remotely interesting is lost. And by the time you get a well-shot piece of action, it'll just be halted by a bizarre gadget. Most of the characters aren't particularly interesting, and Tont can be really awful at times. However, Y isn't too bad, and most of the time he actually feels more professional than Tont. Anyway, that's all I have for this episode of Eurospy Cinema, so I'll see you later. Goodbye!